Hello and welcome to Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And wait, Tarek, who's this?
Oh, it's Timmy. I've been released from the cupboard of dispatching Page Ones for a special appearance on the Page One podcast.
Tim is, you may have heard, if you've listened to the podcast before, we have referred to the boss in quotes, and Tim is that man.
Or legend.
I don't think we've called you legend.
The man, the legend.
I obviously haven't listened to all of them yet.
Tarek, this is one of a special series of episodes we've recorded at the Fringe with comedians to find out about their writing process for their stand-up shows. And we recorded these at a variety of venues across Edinburgh. So the sound quality does vary at times. We sometimes recorded them at the venues themselves. But Tarek wasn't able to make all of the interviews. So Tim kindly agreed to step in.
Interviewer extraordinaire.
Yes, and I think, Tarek, you're out of a job.
I've been waiting 112 episodes for this day. I'm finally free.
Well, you've not heard my ones yet, so we'll see how that goes.
We'll see how it goes with the listeners. But yeah, so we will get straight into these special episodes. We're releasing at least one a day this week. They're very short episodes, but hopefully very interesting and funny, of course. And we'll play a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll get straight into the interview.
But for now, on with the podcast.
See you later.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those taut thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy, and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with Page One.
Hi, and welcome to this special episode of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco.
And I'm Tim.
And we're joined today by Jessica Fostekew. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I always start these podcasts, well, normally if it's an author or something, I'll say, did you always want to be a writer? But did you always want to be a comedian?
No. But I think I always loved writing, actually.
Okay.
So yeah, sure. I mean, feel free to treat me like a writer.
Okay.
And I think my mum sort of hates the idea that I'm a stand-up. Not in a, that sounds cruel, but like she finds the thought of it, she can't think of a worse job, you know. So I'll tell her that I've got like a gig at the Royal Albert Hall, and she'll go, I'm so sorry. You know, whereas her dream for me is to end up writing. So whenever I get anything published or I get anything commissioned in terms of screenwriting, she's like, woo! You know, because that's really where she'd like my career to go. So yeah, no, I did always want to be a writer. I think. Yeah.
So what is it? Legend comedy then? What was that?
So, Do you know what? It was an open submission thing for BBC Three when it was brand new. They did a thing called Finish This Sitcom. And I'd just finished a law degree, and I think I already knew that I didn't want to be a lawyer enough. I realised it was the sort of job that it had to be your sole thing and your passion, because it was so
I feel your pain as a former lawyer.
Okay, yeah. And again, you know, so I was floating around for a bit, you know, I was managing a coffee shop and working in pubs and going travelling and having a great time, no regrets. But yeah, this competition came up where the first 10 minutes of a sitcom, I think, had been written, or you had to either write the first or the last 10 minutes of a pre-existing premise that was already there. Yes, a friend at the time who went on to be actually the father of my son, said, do you want to have a go at that competition with me? And then other things came up. I got into, I wrote some sketches for something, went to see them performed, again, an open submission thing. And then there was some improv on at the same night, which I'd never seen live. And it was, I mean, looking back, probably pretty bad improv, actually. I was so green, I was really impressed. And asked if I could have a go at it. And it sort of went from there, I think. Right. Because so there were comedy things that I was entering competitions, open competitions.
But from a writer's perspective, interestingly, not as a performer perspective.
And actually sort of got there, watched them being performed and thought, I want to do that. I had done bits of Amdram, but I think I thought the idea of a career as an actor or a stand-up was so pie in the sky, actually. But I think what's interesting there is if you go into acting as somebody who writes their own work, you've got light years on actors who aren't up for that or aren't able to do that, because you can make your own work. And that's the joy of stand-up, really, is there's an element of meritocracy. At least it's not just in the lap of the gods about who's got buzz about them, or, you know, in terms of actually getting work made. Well, you make your own work all the time.
Yeah,
but you make it, you do it. You make it, you do it. You're not reliant like acting and all these other things.
When you're stand-up, though, you're kind of, so if you're writing prose or something like that, then you're kind of set apart from your audience in a way until, you know, it becomes a bestseller or whatever. But you're being judged almost immediately, I suppose.
You feel like a very basic bitch. And not just judged, like if they laugh out loud or they don't. Exactly. And I think actually when you're creating shows like we're doing up here, there's a bit more to it. Obviously, I think the success of a comedy show should always hinge, even in these strange days, on whether it's funny or not, like ultimately. But you can also take satisfaction from moments where you know your narrative went on the journey it wanted. You know, you wanted it to. The intent, you know, was behind each section. I mean, I think, certainly for me, and I think for a lot of us now as comedians, an enormous amount of work goes into an hour of stand-up above and beyond jokes in a row. There are different styles, but, you know, most of us now work with a director to make sure there's some kind of structure and a journey to go on in the same way that you would, not in the same way, it's different, but in a similar way to how you would write something narrative.
It's not just a series of one-liners.
Yeah.
So how would you traditionally, maybe it's different now if you've got a director, but how would you go about writing a new routine then, say for a show up here at the Fringe?
So a new routine in terms of a new bit of stand-up, I just let that come to me and I make notes in my phone every time I have a small idea around something. And all there needs to be in that is the seed of something interesting, perhaps a bit of conflict, the same way you'd look at, I think, writing anything. The cicadas, the mismatch expectation, anything as small as that. Yeah. And then my process is to then take it as a story on stage. And then actually it takes me quite a long time to move away from the truth to the funniest version of that thing that's a stand-up. Okay. If you meant how do you start the process of looking at forming a whole show, I don't work very well with writing to a theme. I've made those errors. 2012. For example, that whole show on etymology, which was, you know, I really enjoyed it at the time, but I was a really rookie stand-up, and actually it's a very it's quite a stifling way of going about making an hour of comedy. So I'd rather see what stand-up I've come out with anyway. I'm lucky in the sense that I write autobiographically pretty much when it comes to stand-up, not necessarily other things, but so I see what themes naturally emerge. And then you're often asked to say what your show's going to be about a long time before your show's anywhere near finished. So you sort of have to go on the themes that have emerged by, if the show's for August, by about February. Yeah. So, and almost my last two shows, this show and my last show for sure, by the time I've got up here, it's a show about something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, you see what emerges naturally, and then you play into that, and then you try and make those themes richer and more involving, and you make sure there are twists and turns, and that you go from one position to a new position within that story of that show, etc., etc.
And are you, with these stories, are you taking them out? Are you testing them? Are you working on them, honing them with the sort of August in mind?
Yeah, I do. I'm a workhorse. Like, I really, really, really.
Right. Okay.
And especially as somebody who, with stand-up, needs to write on stage. I mean, like, sitting down with a pen and paper is not something I don't do. But I find that a very hard way. I can unpick little problems like that. But in terms of, like, is this or isn't this going to fly?
Yeah.
And it's the shower moments, it's that, as opposed to sitting down like you would write almost anything else with stand-up. It really, because you've got the constant variable of the audience.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been doing it since 2008, and I still now will have these ideas with pen and paper and think, oh, that is gold, and then find out in reality it just doesn't land.
Yeah.
And there's no way of selling it. And actually, sometimes you need to try 10 times. Oh, there is that way of selling it. You throw it away, or you put it in the context of this, or you give us a more specific example to make your point, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you leave breathing space within your your writing of a show for improv and taking feedback from the audience? Or
absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Otherwise, I would almost argue it's not stand-up.
Yeah, okay.
It's a conversation stand-up, even if the audience's part of that conversation is only laughter. And so if you're delivering something entirely scripted, I find that some kind of comedy quite hard to watch.
Yeah.
And what's fantastic are the comedians who have nailed the pretense. I mean, I have set pieces which, most people can tell must be written if they stop to think about it, but why would they ruin it for themselves like that? I came away from watching Mark Watson last night, who's like, it was a masterclass. And as I walked out with the audience, I overheard a family saying to one another, how much of that do you think he'd written? And one of them went, absolute max 5%. And I thought, oh my God, that's so funny. It's all written, wits, but how joyful that he has mastered that. I mean, and that's the greatest compliment, to be able to be laid back.
And that's where the performance sells it, doesn't it? It sells the writing of it.
Yeah, because that's the other difference in writing, I suppose, that it seems to me anyway, is that it's not just about, even if you were to write it out, it's not about just the words, it's the delivery, it's the timing, it's taking in what the audience are like and knowing how to deliver it for that particular audience, presumably as well. And one thing we have been asking the other guests as well is obviously the dreaded hecklers. Mm-hmm. How do you do? Do you have prepared things to say to hecklers, or do you just off the cuff?
No. When I first started stand-up a million years ago, I thought you had to have some prepared put-downs. But actually, heckling isn't that big a thing anymore. And I think, especially up here, I mean, weekends aside, occasionally, I would never do. I've put too much work into my show to make too much time. So there's not much spare time for those conversations. I don't mind a little bit of interaction, but I'd rather genuinely be on the hoof and prepared for, prepared in the head, but not, with anything written to say back to anyone. But yeah, I think generally up here people realise they're going to see something that doesn't require them to do anything other than sit back and relax and hopefully have a nice time.
Cool. I think that's when where audience, maybe where the Fringe differs, is that people maybe view it as it's more of a structured show rather than just going to a comedy night at a comedy club where it's maybe you might be testing out jokes for a kind of particular show.
Yeah.
I guess, so you probably get a different audience coming, to a Fringe show. Do you feel that?
What? And I think you ask for different things at different times. There are certain venues, there are certain locations. If you're on the Cowgate or ironically even the Pleasance Courtyard, I think you get rowdy weekends. You get sort of stag and hen do's like you'd get. So if you're not doing club comedy and you're on after, I'd say even about 6 p.m. in those places, you're in trouble. And those acts know it. Whereas I wouldn't do a show past 5 p.m, I don't think. Yeah. Or in either of those places.
That's really terrible. And you've also written for shows like Mock the Week and things like that.
Rest in peace.
Yes. Is that, well, first of all, what is that? That's presumably a more collaborative process, is it? Or are you
No,
or is it submitting stuff to them?
No, so my experience has been writing not for the shows per se, but for an individual show.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
so they will send me the brief that they get, and I'll put together a document of jokes for them.
Okay.
But it's different on different shows. There are times where I've written on things, in a writer's room, where you have, say, 4 or 5 of you putting things together but almost always for an individual on that show. Yeah. It's much rarer to write for somebody's stand-up directly, but I have done that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's more collaborative.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, do you bounce the ideas off each other in that sort of situation?
Yeah, you'd have to, really. And I think you can tell when people have used a writer and they've not done that.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's a really touchy subject, I think, using writers. I would never use a writer to help me with my stand-up.
Yeah.
I think... Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to do a disservice to any of the people who are doing it. I think it's quite accepted that if you're working at a point where you're doing lots of topical panels and stuff like that, you're inevitably going to need help just to consume the amount of news you have to read, the amount of whatever. Yeah. The prep is massive. And if you're doing that stuff all the time, I don't know how anyone would do it on their own and keep the quality high. And it's not the case of necessarily there are comedians I've written for who wouldn't take a punchline from me, but they'd take an angle on a story.
Right.
And I think that's where I'd go the level of help.
I was going to say, because otherwise you'd have to do a lot of research into each. You presumably know them, but to really get their kind of tone of voice and how they would deliver punchlines.
There are some comedians I've written for so many times that actually it's a joy to have learnt their tone of voice and be able to go, oh, this is something they'd say, but I wouldn't say. Yeah. And some of them where you think, I'm going to give them this because I know it's going to make them laugh, but I know they'd never say it. Or it never made the edit. Like, that stuff's fun. Yeah.
And you yourself have appeared on some panel shows like QI and things. I mean, is the preparation for something like that different from a stand-up show?
Yeah, completely different. It's a completely different skill set.
Right. Okay.
And the last one of those I did, there was no audience because it was right in the middle of the pandemic and it was hard. So you were just trying to make other comedians laugh, which is, I mean, fun, but it's not really it's not the goal, is it? It's not too niche. So yeah, that was really tricky. But no, the prep is different for each show, but with QI specifically, at the moment, at time of answering the question, I think I'm allowed to be honest about that, but they give you an option. You're allowed to have no prep if you want.
Right.
You're allowed to have everything. Oh God, I probably shouldn't say that.
It's all right.
You're allowed gradients of prep
for
different and for QI. And most people go for none or really minimal, me included, because it's a rookie error to go in there with the pilot notes. Yeah. You really, it's much more fun and you end up being a lot more funny if you're prepared to be.
It goes back to that thing of writing the whole thing out or not. Kind of thing, I suppose. Yeah.
So if you were looking to if you were trying to break into that kind of style of comedy writing, maybe for others or panel shows, would you necessarily need an agent, or how would you kind of get into that world?
Gosh, it's really interesting. The only way I know of into that world is either through, you've ended up in comedy writing through a scheme, an apprenticeship, your bursary, one of those routes, or you are a newer stand-up. And I think what happens quite a lot is a more experienced stand-up will work with someone in the middle slot, be like, gosh, I can tell they've got real writing chops. And it's, I don't know. It's a real leg up. I mean, there's so little money in live work now as a stand-up until you're working at a certain level where, ironically, you're getting money from radio and telly anyway. Yeah. That there's this wonderful grey area in the UK where you can be. There was a long time where I was being employed. Most of my earnings were coming from more successful comedians. So that's the way to do it. And I always thought, gosh, I will make sure I pay that forward and keep an eye on whose writing I'm enjoying so that when I'm in a position to need help with something, I can ask those 3 people what their fee is for a half day and they'll read 15 news stories for me.
So it's really about just getting your work out there so that others like yourself can find you and then maybe work with you in the future.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely,
okay.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we've sort of talked around it, but you want to tell us a bit about your show this year?
Yeah, so my show's called Wench, and I thought I found out I was going to be. I didn't find out. I very much organised to be single for the first time in nearly a decade, a few years ago now. And I thought, oh well, my last show was called Hench. I'll call this show Wench because I planned to have quite a lot of fun. Annoyingly, fell in love within about 2 months. So instead, it's ended up being a show actually about the sort of, I think, the shifting sands of my sexuality fundamentally changed about 4 years ago, and it's about a shift in identity like that at a point in time where it feels like society is more obsessed with identity than ever, and your choices feel more loaded than ever. So it's an exploration of that, essentially.
Cool.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's been really fun to write. Those weren't the themes I expected to come up. I thought it would just be talking about, all the fingering I did in bins as a teen. But it's ended up being, luckily, actually, a fair bit more nuanced. Yeah.
And where and when can people see the show?
It's on every day at Monkey Barrel 1 at 4:45 until the 28th, except for not the 15th.
Excellent.
Excellent. And the final thing that we've been asking everyone is, and we kind of touched on it earlier, what is your worst or your best heckle that you've had?
My favourite heckle I've ever had, it wasn't me that received it. I was at a gig. I was a new comedian. I was on in the middle, and the headliner, the headliner was a bit of a big head. Everybody was having a terrible gig. It was in essentially an old people's home in the evening. They'd stopped for a long hour and a half to have a curry buffet halfway through the show. Not one joke had landed. People were so old in the audience, and the headliner kept saying, you wait. I've been going for 13 years. I know how to play any gig. And he kept saying how well he was going to do. And so obviously when he absolutely stank the gig out, everyone else was delighted. And he got my favourite heckle of all time. He played to silence for about 10 minutes. And then this lady, who must have been over 100, just shouted, "When's the raffle?" And that's my favourite heckle.
I like it. Well, thanks very much for coming on to the
Thanks
podcast.
for having me.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening and join us for the next episode.
See you later.